Okay, picking up where left off, we're talking about how it's very important to be able to squash the root, because if I have root powers on my machine, I don't want to give you necessarily root powers on the file server. Okay, being able to go to the file share and be able to whack anybody's stuff, that don't belong to you, that's not good. So they have this thing called squash root, which basically is a technique that NFS uses to map the root account to a new account called nobody. So there's actually an account that gets built called nobody. All right. It doesn't have any special powers whatsoever. It's just an ordinary user, and you don't log into it. There's not like anything like that. So that if you're root and you do a sudo and you hit an NFS share, it basically says, "Screw you, we ain't playing that game." Okay. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the NFS server piece on our machine. Now I've already installed it once, so this is going to be somewhat anticlimactic, so just bear with me. So basically, I'm going to do a sudo. Only if I get focus here. Sudo apt install, and it's nfs-kernel-server. Helps if you spell it right. Actually, it doesn't really matter because I've already got it installed, but I'm just showing you guys how it works. And it says, hey man, you've already got this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool. So otherwise, you would have gone through. Now remember, we talked about how the kernel, the NFS server piece is baked into the kernel. Okay, so it's not like a device driver. So sometimes when you do this, you might actually have to reboot to be able to make it to work. But we're gonna continue. Okay. So there's actually a database that gets installed called xtab, which maintains a set of directories where which ones have been exposed as potential exports. See, I didn't use share, did I? And then what users are allowed to connect and what protocols we're using. Now we don't get to see this database because it's not designed to be human readable, but there is a human readable thing called exports. So I'm just going to use VI, even though I'm not going to make any changes to the exports file. Okay, so I don't have anything in there. Basically, the pound sign basically means, so this is the human readable version. And so I go in here and I make some changes and I add some stuff. And so for example, I say, hey, I want to build me a share. And so I would give it, okay, my share is going to be at, whatever location. And here's the host name and whether or not they give permissions to it, and all the rest of those kinds of things. So that's basically how it works for how to do NFS. Whether I want to read write, do I want to synchronize, blah, 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 all the rest of these kinds of things. Okay, now this is human readable part. So after you've made changes to this, you basically have to tell it, oh, by the way, I need to recompile that guy, and we'll explain that in just a minute. So let's talk about the client specifications for this. Okay, I talked about the server. So here's what has to happen. Here, basically, you have to give it a host name, right? Which could, in my case, is probably not going to use a fully qualified host name. Probably we're just going to use, like in my case, mine's called Ubuntu server. I think it's Ubuntu-server. Dang it, I don't remember. Let's go see what it says, because I'm obviously out of my mind. Oh, it doesn't show it. Anyway, who cares? So whatever the name of the machine is, okay, cool. Or it could be an NIS group. Don't worry what that basically means. NIS is sort of like, it's kind of sort of like a distributed file system kind of a thing for names. Okay, don't worry about what that means. No one's used that in quite some time. Wildcards, which means I could say, well, I'll take anything from Microsoft.com, asterisk.microsoft.com. That's one way of doing it. And then you could use an IP4 address or an IP6 address. So any one of those things would work from the client's perspective. Now let's go look at the export options. Now that it's come time for me to export, what choices do I have on how to export a directory? Well, you can export it as read-only. You can export it as read-write. You can say, well, read mostly, and then it gives me a list of those who must. And then root squash, we talked about that, where it takes the user ID of 0 and maps it over to something else. No root squash, ugh. I don't want to do that. All squash, which means I don't care who the heck you are, you're all going to be considered an anonymous user. So, basically turn authentication off. Just say, screw it, I don't care. All users, no matter who they are, get down to a thing called anonymous. And probably, this is how you would probably have like a read-only file system for people to go get stuff. Like, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're authenticated. It doesn't matter. Just go get the stuff. But you won't be able to write anything. Okay. And then, how do I do anonymous UID and GID and all the rest of the thing? Well, you have no access and all the rest of these things. The one that's kind of cool is the one about the subtree check. Verifies that each requested file is within the exported subtree. This is kind of weird. What you're basically talking about is I go in here and I ask for a file. Remember in the old days, the server had no idea what was going on. This one, the stateful thing going on, it kind of knows all the stuff that's going on. And so this was kind of a thing that basically said, do you want to stop and check to see if everything is okay? Because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of effort trying to find a file that doesn't exist. Okay. Anyway, lots and lots of stuff in here. Okay. So I'm going to skip over a bunch of the other stuff that's not really relevant to us in an Ubuntu world. Okay. So now it's time for us to install the client side stuff. So I'm kind of sort of ready to turn on an export. Kind of, sort of, almost. So let's go back here and let's do this install again, except this time I'm going to install, let me do a Q to get out of that guy. This time I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my home. So I'm going to do a sudo apt install, except this time I want to do the client piece. So it's called NFS Common. Okay. So it already was there. Okay, that's fine. No big deal. So how do I mount a file system? So I'm just going to pretend. Okay, I'm just going to pretend this is not real because I don't have a file server to play with yet. So you know how before you would do something like mount and you would say like, dev, whatever this thing was, SDB, whatever, right? And then you mount it to some mount point. Okay, that's basically how it would work. Cool. Well, here, basically what you need to do, instead of having some device, you put the machine name and a colon and the name of the export. Now, the name of the export could be anything. It could be kumquat. So you don't actually care physically what directory it is. That's none of your business, okay? So in the NFS world, what this would be, this would come out to, I want to connect to, main server or whatever, right? Main server colon, I don't know, file share 1. Actually, just don't call it this. Call it export 1. Okay? So that colon basically means when I attempt to mount, I give it the server name, colon, and then the name of the export. Because every export has a name. And then I mount it to my mount point. Cool beans? Okay. So when you're running the mount command, hey, come on. What can you do? Okay, so now we're talking about the mount command. The mount command I can read, read write and read only and do all sorts of stuff and all the rest of the thing. You've kind of seen some of this stuff before. Well, there's some specific ones that were designed for NFS, and one of them is called hard. If the server goes down, make operations that access it block until the server comes back up. So hard and soft were things that were added that basically says, hey, if somebody's rebooting the server, what do you want to do? Do you want to just say, I'm sorry, I have an error? And say, sorry, man, server went down. Or you just want to say, hang on a second, and just wait until maybe the server comes back. Now, that's kind of an interesting topic because if it's going to be down for a very short part of time, hard would probably make the most sense. If it's going to be down for us a really long time, like you're doing maintenance or something, then maybe soft would be it. But since this is the mounting point, that's done at the client. The client decides that, not me, right? I have no way of switching you from your client scenario. I have no way of switching you from hard to soft or soft to hard. Okay, just saying. And then interrupt. Interrupt allows users to interrupt blocked operations. So basically, if you expect to see an awful lot of line noise, lots of interruptions and breaks and, somebody's rebooting a router, well then, yeah, you probably want to allow or don't allow. It's basically the same thing. One is the server's unavailable, and the other one is the network is going nuts on you. So do I want to say return an error, or I want to say hang on, just wait. We're not going to do any interrupts here. We're not going to allow any interrupts. We're just going to wait. Okay? So those things, and then of course, now we have retry timeouts and times and all the rest of these things to be able to, so I can't wait forever, right? So some of these flags were specifically designed. So if you look at the FS tab, okay, of a system that has, this is what a typical one would look like. Instead of a device name, right? They have a machine called monk, and then home, which is their name of their export. And then I'm mounting it to something on my machine called NFS home. The file type is NFS, yes. And the flags are, okay, read write, background, which means don't wait, go ahead and keep going. Don't bother with interrupts. Don't bother with hard. I'm not doing any device ID, and I'm definitely not allowing any set UID stuff go on. And so now that is a typical line that you would have inside your FS tab to make it so this guy, when your machine reboots, it'll remember to remount. Okay, you might think about this a minute and go, this is probably not good enough, because when I mount something, I'm expecting it always to be there. So what happens if I reboot a server or a router goes down for, 5 minutes? Clearly longer than the timeout period that would normally you would use. That means I have to go run the mount command a second time? Well, there actually are some tasks, some administrative tasks that get installed that it's called auto mount. Yeah. What it basically does is it watches the conversations on your client. And then if for some reason, it doesn't matter if it was a hard thing or a soft thing or an interrupt or not an interrupt, doesn't matter which one, it just says, well, hang on a second. Instead of having you type the mount command over again to make up for a failure, I'm just going to go through and just keep trying it over and over and over with some administrative things, which is kind of cool. Okay. So on page 810, they talk about the identity mapping in version 4. So yes, there is a thing called an ID map config file. So if I do let's go back to this guy. And obviously I'm going to zero out that because obviously that's not going to work. So I'm going to do a man on NFS ID map. Oop. Okay. Actually, yeah. So here is the thing that basically maintains this map. And there's a config file that you can go in and say, okay, here's what I want. Here's what I've got. I want to map this user to this user, this user to this user. And hopefully, to tell you the honest to God truth, hopefully you don't have to use this. There's a heck of a lot easier way to do this using some third-party thing, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so there actually is an etc. imdmap.config file. So on the client side, I can do the thing called NFS stat, which gives me the status of so if I did it now, of course I got nothing going on. But if I did NFS stat minus S, that'll give me the server. Huh? Oh, it actually has 2 S's in it. Okay, so I don't have I'm not sharing anything out, so I wasn't really expecting to get anything. But if I did the one for the client, well, there are no clients either. I'm not either one. So I don't have a server running, and I certainly don't have, well, actually I do have a server running. I just don't have anything configured. And I'm not currently connected to it. I have nobody else connected to it, so therefore I don't have any status to show you. But S for server and C for client. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You know how this works.